Hi everyone, welcome to another video on my channel. Today we'll be looking at vulnerability scanning, and then we'll be looking at also the different types, which is authenticated scan versus non-authenticated scan. And if you look at the image I have here, this is actually being deliberate. If you look at the image on my left, you would see that I have this guy, which is a strong um, a strong comic, describing this guy has a lot of power and then he can do more stuff. And then if you look at the other guy here, which is just a laid back guy watching TV, sipping soda and all of that, being lazy here and all of that. So this is just to show you how dedicated, non-dedicated scan actually works. It's more like a lazy type of scanning and all of that. So I did this deliberately, just to provide a little bit of imagery to the concept of what I'm trying to explain. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so our main objective is going to be looking at what is vulnerability scanning, the definition of vulnerability scanning across vulnerability assessment tools, and then also we'll be looking at the different types of vulnerability scanning, which is authenticated scan and non-authenticated scan, right? Okay, so let's continue. So exactly is what does vulnerability scanning actually mean? So vulnerability scanning happens to be the third process, which is assessment in the vulnerability management process. And then what it actually means is that it's the process of using specific vulnerability identifiers to identify specific vulnerabilities affecting application, services, firmware, port, and assets. So the asset here may actually be a web application, it could be a database, it could be a server or a host machine, depending on type of asset, depending on what you're running the assessment on. So the critical thing here is the identifiers, and that's so I like that. So each different vulnerability assessment tools use different identifiers to identify specific vulnerabilities. So for Tenable, for example, they use plugin IDs. For Qualys, they use Qualys identifiers. For Rapid7, they use vulnerability ID. So each of these IDs identifies specific vulnerabilities. So for example, in Tenable uses plugin ID 51192, which is to identify SSL vulnerabilities. So you can actually, for example, one of the benefits of that is if you're trying to troubleshoot or you're trying to identify, gain more details or more information about a specific vulnerability or how to remediate specific vulnerabilities, you could actually use the query these plugin ID to actually do your research and all of that. So that's what the identifier actually is. So remember, each vulnerability assessment tool will definitely have an ID to identify specific vulnerabilities, okay? And then there are two types. There is authenticated scan and then there is non-authenticated scan. I've seen organizations, use non-authenticated scans, which I usually happen to call a lazy approach. When I mean lazy, I'm not trying to insult, but what I'm just trying to say is that the lazy approach is the assessment itself. It doesn't do in-depth scanning. That's what I mean by the lazy approach. I'm going to take you through showing you how the benefit of the differences between both of them and how it could actually benefit your organization. The best practice is to always run authenticated scans because it provides you with provides you with a lot of information. Okay. So let's look at the difference between authenticated scan and non-authenticated scans. So one of the most first requirements for dedicated scan is that you would definitely need a local administrative account credential. So this might apply to your local machine, or definitely if you're running in a domain-based environment. So even if you're running a domain-based environment, that credential should have a local administrative access to that machine. So if you have you're running, maybe let's say a labs.local, for example, you need to have an administrative account that would have local access to that particular that asset, local machine that you're trying to run your assessment. By the time we get into the demo section, I'm going to take you through and then you have more understanding as to how this could actually be done, especially in the domain environment. Okay, but this is just to provide a little bit of context so that you can have that theoretical understanding and the proper background knowledge as to the difference between authenticated and non-authenticated scans. Okay, so the first thing is that we've agreed that there has to be a local administrative credentials that will be used to run the assessment. So for non-dedicated scan, this is not required. You don't need any local administrative accounts. You could just go with your default setting or whatever configuration you want to run, use, and then you just run your assessment. And then another thing is that with authenticated scan, you tend to get more vulnerability scan results. So for example, if you're running an assessment, you may have like 100 vulnerabilities when you are running authenticated scan, then you might just have 10 using non-authenticated scan. This happens to be on the same device. So which means that the scan you couldn't get more vulnerabilities because of the privileges that your assessment tool has on the target machine you're trying to run your assessment on. So the local administrative account will give you that higher privilege. It will give the assessment tool the higher privilege to be able to run in-depth scans so that you can identify more vulnerabilities. And then another thing is that it requires more scanning time for a dedicated scan. You tend to have more scanning time. It requires more scanning time. So, for example, if you're running a local if you're using a dedicated scan, it might take you, let's say, 20 minutes. If you're running a dedicated scan, then it might take you 5 minutes. If you're running on dedicated scans, and the reason is because of the privileges. So the privilege will allow you to go more in depth, and then it will allow you to get a more vulnerability. So that in-depth scanning itself, it's going to take a little bit of time as compared to more dedicated scans. And like I've mentioned over and over, is that it identifies more vulnerabilities, whereby because it is doing more in-depth scanning. So the I kind of overflog the fact that the in-depth scanning, because that's what provides you with getting more critical vulnerabilities and all of that. And then for dedicated scan, it also applies to web application. It applies to host or server machines that you're trying to run your assessment on. It also applies to databases. So depending on the type of assessment you're running, just bear in mind that authenticated scan is actually the way to go when you're running your assessment. You definitely will have an opportunity to either run authenticated scan or not authenticated scan, but the best practice is to always use authenticated scan, because this would give you, looking at all of the benefit that we mentioned, it provide you with additional vulnerabilities and things like that. And the core reason why you're doing this, because you want to have that full visibility into the vulnerability that a particular asset they might definitely have. Because if you run on a dedicated scan, you definitely be overlooking some vulnerabilities because you're not running in-depth scan, and the threat actor could leverage on, probably they were able to steal some credentials, and then they're running authenticated scan to your environment. They'll be able to find more vulnerabilities, because now you might be, in terms of severity levels, you might find, let's say, 10 critical vulnerabilities, and let's say 3 of them are exploitable. Okay, I mean, readily there's an exploit out there in the internet that could be used to exploit such vulnerabilities. But if you're running non-dedicated scan, you might only just find maybe medium or low level severity level type of vulnerabilities. Okay, if you look at the difference, you see that running the authenticated scan is more valuable, because it was able to pick up critical vulnerabilities that are exploitable and all of that. So that's another additional value that I actually wanted to add to that, so that you could know how valuable, how important it is when you're running authenticated scan. Okay, so finally we're just going to go into the lab section. All right. Okay, so I'm in the lab section. So now the way I've designed my lab environment is that I have my Nexus server, which is installed on a Linux machine, and then I have my Active Directory machine. Okay, so what I'm going to show you in this lab section is that we're going to run I've already run an authenticated scan, and a non-authenticated scan already, but I just want to show you some of the requirement that needs to be done before you should be able to run the credential scan effectively. Okay, so firstly, let's go into, let me just show you the Nessus server I have. So I installed Nessus Essential because that's actually a free version. It allows you to run 16 different IP addresses. So this is my Nessus environment. So I'm running Nessus Essential and install it on the on the CentOS machine. Okay, so this is a typical environment. Probably in another video, I'm going to walk you through how you can actually set up a Nessus Essential. There are numerous videos out there on YouTube you could actually watch on how to set up Nessus Essentials. Okay, so in the settings, you see that it's actually licensed. I have these are some of the settings that are already embedded that you have to go through and all of that. Okay, so but this is not the main reason of what I just want to show you that this is my Nessus Essential. But let's go into my AD. So remember in the class section I said that for you to be able to run a dedicated scans, especially in the domain environment, you need to have a local administrative account. Okay, so first of all, let's go into my AD environment. So I'm using labs.local as my domain name, which is actually for the lab section, which I'm using for my lab environment. Okay, so the first thing is that if you want to run a dedicated scan in the domain environment, first thing we need to do is to first create a Nessus account. Okay, so that Nessus account should definitely have administrative access. You must have a local administrative access. So the first thing to do is we go to Active Directory, domain name and computers. Yes. And then we create user accounts. So let's wait for, okay, so yeah, there we go. So I already have my locallabs.com, and then I go to the OU I created for my OU that I created for the labs.local, and then I'm just trying to see I could create my Nessus. So I've created a Nessus account here. Okay, but let me just show you how you can create a Nessus account. So you create new user, say Nessus 2, for example, and then Nessus 2 user account, and then you create a password. Password never expires. Okay, and then you click on next, and then you're done. So the thing we need to do is to ensure that this account has an administrative access. So if you look at some of the properties I have for my previous accounts, you go to member, so you see it's a member of an administrator. Okay, so just to show you how to add this to an administrative account, to an administrative group, properties, and then member of, and then you had administrator, then you check names to confirm, and then you're good, then you apply. Okay, so now this is a member of an administrative account. It's now an administrative it's now a member of an administrative group on your Active Directory. So another way to also do it that is more effective is to use group policy. If you use group policy is going to be more effective because it's going to allow you to be able to add that local administrative account to all of your computers, so that Active Directory will have that access as local administrative account to the local machine you're trying to scan. So to do that, let's go to our group policy. Let's go group policy. Okay, and then what we do is that we create a GPU. We go to the domain, So we add it to the OU that we want that group policy to be applied to. So for us, we want to apply to all our computers. So on the computers, you create a GPO, okay, and then we can call it administrative local accounts. Administrative local accounts, okay. Then we click OK, and then we edit. We can enforce it, probably because especially if we want to use Nessus to scan all of our environment, we can actually enforce it so that all of our computers in the domain should have the Nessus account as an administrative account. So we say enforced, and then if you right click it again, you click on edit. So we're going to go into that together. Okay, so the first thing we go to, so we navigate to policies, Windows settings, we go to security settings. Let me stretch this out a little bit, and then we click on restricted groups. Okay, so these restricted groups, this will allow us to be able to add a local account, okay, to this group. So I click on it, I will say so on this part we open, we click on add group. Okay, so we browse, and also the group we're looking for is administrator. Okay, and then we check names, so administrators, click on OK, and then we click on OK. So here, so we're going to configure the membership, so members of this group, so we also click on add. So this group, also we need to add the members of this group, administrator, check names, then click OK, and then we apply. Okay, then we do OK. So we've been able to add administrators. So this administrative account will have local access into all of the computers that we're going to be adding that will be in that particular OU. So let's just validate again. Members of this group. Okay, we could also do Nessus as well, just to, since Nessus, so we had Nessus 1, we could just pick one of them. Okay, and then we say okay. Yes, do okay, and then we also had, so members of this group, these are members of this group. This group is a member of administrators group. So the first group here we have, this is a Nessus member, okay, and then it's a member of the administrators group. And then we click on apply, and then we click on OK. Okay, so now if we were to add this to, if we were to log on to any local machine in our domain, we'll be able to view that administrative account. So the next thing to do is we would apply this group policy. So we close this, and then to apply the group policy, we just close this as well. We just go to a command prompt, and then we do group gp update /force. So this would add that particular group into a group policy. So all the computers in that particular OU would inherit this particular policy. So once we go into the user account, we'll be able to see that particular group. Okay, so that being done, so let's move into our Nessus server, and then we run an authenticated scan, and then let's see how that goes. Okay, so now we're in our CentOS machine, so I log into my Nessus server. So the first thing to do is we're going to look with scan. So I've already run the scan already. This is an authenticated scan, and this is the non-authenticated scan. So let me just take you to a dedicated scan, and then we look at configure. It's pretty much the same thing. it takes you to the same. So this is the same process of create. So if you had created, so let me just take you through this so that it doesn't sound confusing. Back to scan. So we create new scan, for example, and then we select basic network scan. So that would bring us to this same page. Okay, so let me just go back and just edit the previous one, and then we go through the same approach. So this is the authenticated scan that we ran. Click on more, configure. Okay, so now I named it as authenticated scan, and it's also good to have a good naming convention, especially when you're running multiple scans. One of the things I tend to do is that I tend to create different folders, so you can actually create different folders. So these are different folders. Thing so you can create new folder here, new folder, and then you can call it, let's say, domain scans, for example, and then you create. So here you can always add your scans to specific folders. So this actually makes it your administrative, managing your scans easier because you place them in different folders. So it makes it much more easier to manage all of that. Okay, so the thing is that, so let's look at authenticated scans, and let's go back to that, and then we configure. Okay, so the first thing we said, you name it, have a good naming convention, authenticated scans, and then the target. So yeah, we can select different folders. So this is the new folder I just created, domain account. So I can just say save this particular scan result into the domain scans. So if I go back to my domain scan folder, I will find the results of that particular scan. I'll find it in this domain scan. So that's about that. Let's move it back to my scans. And then the target is the IP address that we're trying to scan. So for me, my IP address in my lab is 192.168.10/0/24. So I'm scanning the entire subnet. That's why I put /24. So you can also add multiple subnets. So it doesn't just have to be one. So if you want to scan multiple subnets, you could use multiple subnets, and then you can scan depending on the subnets, the numbers of subnets you want to scan. So I'm just going to use the default settings. So for schedules, if you want to schedule the scan, you can actually select frequency. Maybe you want to run it weekly, you want to run it daily. So for me, I'm just running it once, so I don't have to do all of that. So for discovery, this is if you want to run a discovery scan. So I'm just running, if you want to run all port scans, you could do that. I'm going to do a video on some of the best practice as to how to configure your basic scans and some of the parameters you should look out for when you want to run a proper scan. So I'm just going to do default, just take you through default settings just to see what's going on. So this is the scan type, default settings, reports. We are not, so another thing for the report is that you can actually allow users to edit scans. You can take this out. You can designate hosts by their DNS names. So sometimes some of the times you might want to say, okay, I don't want to display IP address, I just want to display the domain, the DNS name of that particular host and all of that. And then you can display the host that responds to ping. So these are just basic scans configurations. And then for advanced, we're not going to touch the advanced. I'm going to create another video on understanding how this settings really works. Okay, so the main thing here is to look at the credentials. So going to the credentials, this is where you're actually going to configure the credential scan. So for hosts, there are two types. You could do for SSH, which is for Linux based, and for Windows based, which is the host we're trying to do. But if you want to look at all of the parameters, you can actually run authenticated scans. So these are all of the parameters you can actually use. So if you want to run it on databases, if you select database, you'll be able to input the parameters. So these are the parameters for databases. If you want to run an authenticated scan on database machine, if you want to run telnet, RSH, so these are all of the services that you might want to run authenticated scans on. So if you want to do for HTTP, these are all of the parameters you might also want to go through. So dependent, so also for networks as well, for the Palo Alto, these are all of the parameters you might have to fill in. MongoDB, the same thing applies. So you're going to fill all of these parameters. So, but for us, we're only just focused on Windows. So let me just delete all of this and then just focus on Windows. Okay. Okay, so for Windows, remember that this computer is running it's joined to a party, it's joined to a domain. So we're running like a domain scan. We're running an authenticated scan in a domain environment. So your authentication method will have to be password. Okay, then you put in the username, which is Nessus, based on what we created, and then the password, we input the password, and then the domain. So the domain has to be full, labs.local. So yours might be maybe cisco.com, whatever domain name you have in your organization, and then you select the parameters, the default global settings parameters here. And then once you're done with that, you click on save. Okay, you click on save, and then you can run your scans. Okay, so once you click on save, you can just come here and just click on launch. Once you click on this launch button, it automatically launches your scan. Okay, so I've actually run both of them. So the same thing applies for non-authenticated scan as well. So because I don't want to waste time, so let's look at authenticated scans and let's look at some of the results that we have. So you notice that we have 82 vulnerabilities, 41 critical, 78 high, 27 medium, one is low and the other one is information. Okay, so let's look at all of the vulnerabilities. These are the vulnerabilities that was identified. Okay, based on the scan that we ran. So it's 82, so we have to keep narrowing down to see all of these vulnerabilities. So these are all of the vulnerabilities. You can also look at them based on criticality. So we have 13 critical. So you can also filter here as well. You can use the filter button to filter vulnerabilities as well. So let's look at how we could do some filters. Let's look for severity, and then we could do critical. Okay, so this will just provide us with all the critical vulnerabilities. Okay, so we have just two critical vulnerabilities, and so these are the counts. So we have 38 of Microsoft Windows vulnerabilities. So it provides us with these are the vulnerabilities, and then you can click on it just to view what Nessus finds. So Windows 10 version 167, blah blah blah. So it provides us with also with the solution of what we can actually do to remediate that particular vulnerability. To scroll down, so provide us with solution. So it says apply cumulative update. So it's just to apply the updates for that particular version. So it's missing one of the following roll-up KBs. So these are the roll-up KBs that is missing. So all we just need to do to remediate this is just to update that particular vulnerability. Okay, so that is that on authenticated scans. So let's go back and let's look at non-authenticated scans, and then I'll show you how you can actually view if Nessus actually was, if the authenticated scan was actually successful. So let's look at the non-authenticated scan. Remember, for the authenticated scans, we had huge amount of vulnerability. We were able to record this huge amount of vulnerabilities. We had 41 critical, 78 medium high, and all of that. So let's go to non-authenticated scans, and then let's see what we have. Okay, so you notice that we have different variation in the vulnerability, in the severity level of the vulnerability. So you see we're able to get 6 eyes. So you notice that we didn't even record any critical vulnerability, and the reason is because we didn't run an authenticated scan. So like I said in the class section, I said that for authenticated scans, it allows you to go deeper into the application, into the operating system, to identify vulnerabilities. And then if you look at non-authenticated scan, you see that we couldn't even find any critical vulnerability at all. We could only view was the high, and also was the medium, and then was the information. So you see that authenticated scan is already showing you more value as compared to non-authenticated scans. And then finally, let's look at, so for authenticated scan, another thing to take note is that you can actually know, if you want to know if your authenticated scan was successful in terms of the credentials we used, we're going to look at a specific plugin that you can actually use to check if your credentials was actually was successful. So let's look at the filter section, and then let's try to look at the plugin. So we do plugin, plugin ID, and then we'll do 195.06. So this is the plugin to confirm. These are one of the plugins that you can actually use, but this actually shows you if you have an authenticated scan to display the credentials that you actually used to run the scan, and then to show you if it was successful or not. And then let's apply. Okay, so this is actually IP address that we're looking. So the IP address for the machine I'm scanning, which is my AD, is 192.168.10.1. Okay, so let's look at that information. Let's just scanning information. So it provides us with the details of the scan. Okay, so it tells us that the Nessus scanner we're using, which is like those space. So this is my CentOS machine, providing me with that information. So the key thing that we're looking for here is this. So you notice that you said credential check. So yes, meaning that our scan was successful. So we use a Nessus based on the scan that we actually configured. Nessus username, yes, Nessus, and the domain name is labs.local, which was actually similar to. So if you want to confirm if your credential scan was successful, you could actually just check that plugin 195.06, and then to provide you with that particular information as we getting to see if your scan was actually successful. Another thing you could also do is, let me just take you through to my browser here, and then we could just look at Google and then check some of the plugins for troubleshooting. So Tenable Authenticated scans plugins. Okay, so you can use this to also troubleshoot, because this will provide you with that detail as to, looking at some other plugins that you can actually use to troubleshoot your authenticated scans. Okay, so useful plugins to troubleshoot credential scans. Okay, so it's coming up. Okay, so these are the logins. So this is for successful login on Windows. So this is the plugin I used, okay, to check the settings. So 195.06. It will provide you with that detailed information as to credential check. There actually are really no dependencies, but this is the information that you can actually. So this, once you can run a scan and you find that you have plugin 195.06, and you find that it provides you with the credentials that you used to test, then that means that your scan was actually successful. Okay, so thank you very much for viewing. I hope you find this video valuable, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye for now.